I woke up early this morning because I heard a strange noise outside my house. At first, I thought it was just the wind hitting the metal trash cans again, like it did last week. But the sound was different. Heavy, slow. I pulled on my jeans and an old gray hoodie and walked quietly to the front door. My hand was shaking a little as I turned the handle. When I opened the door, I couldn't breathe for a second. Right there, just a few feet away, stood the snow leopard I saw yesterday. But today, he wasn't alone. He was standing on the porch with his massive paws pressed against my glass door, and in his mouth, he held a tiny cub by the scruff of its neck. Another cub was sitting between his front legs, looking up at me with the widest blue eyes I'd ever seen. For a moment, all I could hear was my heart pounding in my ears. The cub in his mouth wiggled its small paws, trying to find a comfortable position. The leopard's eyes locked onto mine, and I swear, in that second, everything else faded away. There was no wind, no cold, just those eyes staring deep into me. I didn't know what to do. My hands started sweating, and my knees felt weak. I stepped back a little, thinking he might attack. But he didn't move. He just stood there, breathing heavily, his sides rising and falling with each slow breath. I remembered yesterday when he came alone. He looked thin and tired then, his ribs showing through his thick fur. I gave him meat from my freezer, and he took it without growling, just looked at me with the same calm eyes. But now, with these two cubs, I realized this wasn't just about hunger. This was something else, something deeper, like he was asking for help without words. The cub on the floor moved closer to the edge of the porch, sniffing the cold air. Its fur was matted, and it looked so small against its father's huge legs. I noticed how the bigger leopard shifted his weight, keeping the cub between his paws, as if to protect it from the world. I didn't even know snow leopards lived this close to town. Seeing him yesterday was already unreal, but this felt like a dream I couldn't wake up from. I tried to say something, but my voice came out as a whisper. "Hey, big guy, what do you want from me today?" He didn't growl, didn't move, just blinked slowly, his big tail curling around the cub at his feet. I felt a strange ache in my chest, a mix of fear, awe, and something else I couldn't name. The cub in his mouth squeaked softly, and he bent down to place it gently next to its sibling. Then he raised his head again and looked at me. I noticed there was a fresh wound on his front leg near his shoulder. It wasn't bleeding heavily, but the fur around it was crusted dark red. Maybe that's why he came. Maybe he couldn't hunt with that wound. Maybe his cubs were starving. The thought made my stomach twist. I stepped back into the house and grabbed the leftover meat I had from last night. I didn't think twice. I just walked to the doorway and placed the meat on the porch right between us. My hands were trembling so hard I almost dropped it. He sniffed the air, but didn't move forward. The cubs pressed closer to him, both of them looking half scared, half curious. I crouched down slowly, trying not to look threatening. My heart felt like it would explode. "It's okay," I said quietly. "It's for you. Take it, please." He lowered his head, eyes never leaving mine, and grabbed the meat in his powerful jaws. The cubs squeaked again, moving around his legs. He shifted his body to block them from me, almost like he was shielding them, even though I wasn't doing anything. His eyes softened for a moment, and then he turned, the meat hanging from his mouth, and walked off the porch, the cubs scrambling after him on unsteady little legs. I stood there, frozen, staring as he disappeared between the trees at the edge of my property. The morning sun caught on his spotted fur, making him look like a ghost moving through the woods. When they were gone, I realized I was holding my breath. I let it out in one long, shaky sigh. What just happened? Why did he come to me? Why bring his cubs here? My hands were still trembling as I closed the door and leaned against it. My heart felt too big for my chest. Yesterday, I fed a poor, hungry snow leopard. Today, he came back with his family. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was part of something bigger than myself. Yesterday was colder than today. The sky was covered in thick gray clouds, and the wind kept blowing leaves against my porch. I spent most of the afternoon fixing the loose boards on my back fence, trying to keep my mind busy. I didn't want to think about work or bills or the fact that I hadn't spoken to anyone all day. By the time evening came, I was so tired I almost fell asleep on the old wooden chair in my living room. Around 7, I got up to make dinner. I pulled out some ground beef I'd been saving for the weekend and shaped it into patties. As I was frying them, I heard a noise outside. It was quiet at first, like someone dragging something across gravel. I ignored it, thinking it was probably a raccoon or maybe a stray dog sniffing around the trash cans again. But then I heard a deep, low sound, almost like a growl, but not aggressive, more like a heavy sigh. I turned off the stove and walked to the kitchen window. At first, I didn't see anything in the fading light, but then I saw a movement near the metal trash cans by the edge of my property. I leaned closer to the glass, squinting, and then I saw him, the snow leopard. He was standing with his head down, his massive body looking smaller than it should have been. Even in the dim evening light, I could see how thin he was. His ribs showed under his spotted fur, and his shoulders looked bony and sharp. His tail twitched slowly behind him as he sniffed the ground around the cans. I felt my stomach twist. What was a snow leopard doing here? I'd never seen one this close to town. I didn't even know they came this far down from the mountains. My first thought was to grab my phone and take a video. But then he lifted his head and looked straight at my window. Even from that distance, I could see his eyes. They weren't wild and angry like I expected. They looked tired. So tired. I put my phone down and stepped back from the window. For a few seconds, I just stood there, thinking. I couldn't let him leave hungry. I didn't care how dangerous it was. Something about the way he looked at me made my chest ache. I opened the freezer and grabbed 2 packs of ground beef I'd been saving. I didn't think twice. I just walked to the back door, pulled on my boots, and stepped out into the cold evening air. The wind bit at my face, but I barely felt it. My eyes were locked on the leopard. He didn't move when I came closer. I walked slowly, keeping my arms low so I didn't scare him. When I was about 20 feet away, I stopped. He was watching me, his tail flicking back and forth across the gravel. I could hear my own breathing louder than the wind. "Hey," I said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you." He blinked slowly. I crouched down and opened the first pack of beef, placing the cold meat on the ground in front of me. Then I opened the second pack and placed it next to the first. The smell of raw meat hit me hard, but I ignored it. "Here, it's for you." He took a cautious step forward. His massive paws made no sound on the gravel. He paused, looking at me with those deep, tired eyes, and then he moved closer. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I stayed crouched, not moving an inch. When he reached the meat, he sniffed it once and then started eating. He didn't tear at it like a starving animal would. He ate slowly, chewing each bite, his eyes flicking up to me every few seconds. I could see the scars on his nose and under his right eye. Old scars. Signs of a life spent fighting to survive. For a few minutes, the only sounds were his quiet chewing and the wind rustling the dry grass around us. I felt like I was holding my breath the whole time. When he finished the last piece, he licked his lips and looked at me one final time. Our eyes locked again, and I felt something inside me shift, like he was thanking me without words. Then he turned and walked away, his long tail curling behind him. I watched him disappear into the darkness between the trees. My knees felt weak as I stood up. I walked back into the house, closed the door, and leaned against it, trying to calm my shaking hands. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. Those tired eyes. That quiet strength. I didn't know then that he would come back. And I didn't know he would bring his cubs with him. I didn't sleep much last night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the snow leopard's face. Those tired, heavy eyes. And those 2 small cubs, clinging to his legs, looking at me with silent questions I couldn't answer. In the morning, I forced myself to get up. My back hurt from sleeping on the old couch, but I didn't care. I needed groceries. I hadn't gone to town in over a week, and my fridge was almost empty. I grabbed my keys, locked the front door, and drove down the winding road to the small store near the highway. It was still early, so the parking lot was mostly empty. I walked in and grabbed a basket, trying to focus on my list: bread, eggs, milk, coffee. But my mind kept drifting back to those cubs. They were so small. How long had they been hungry before their father brought them to me? As I reached for a carton of eggs, I heard 2 men talking near the meat section. Their voices were low, but the store was quiet enough that I could hear every word. "You hear about that leopard sighting near town?" One man said. "Yeah," the other replied. "Damn thing's been roaming around for weeks now. You know how much its skin would sell for?" My chest tightened. I gripped the eggs harder, afraid I might drop them. "Couple grand. Easy," the first man said. "My cousin shot one up north 2 years back. Sold the pelt to some collector overseas. Paid off his truck loan with that money." The second man laughed. "Hell, if I see it, I'll shoot it myself." Imagine having that thing mounted in your living room. They kept talking, but their words turned into a dull roar in my ears. I could hear my own heart beating, loud and fast. My throat felt dry. I placed the eggs gently into my basket and walked to the coffee aisle, pretending to browse while my hands shook. They were just men trying to make money. But to me, they were monsters. I thought about that leopard's wound on his leg. What if it was from a bullet? What if they'd already tried to shoot him and he'd barely escaped? What if next time he wasn't so lucky? My stomach twisted. I grabbed a can of coffee without looking at the brand and moved to the checkout. As I stood in line, I felt sweat drip down my back. The two men were behind me, still talking about hunting trips and rifles. Their words felt like poison in the air. When I got to my truck, I sat for a long moment, staring at the steering wheel. I felt like I couldn't breathe. That leopard trusted me enough to come to my porch. He showed me his cubs. He showed me his wound. And now people wanted to kill him for money. On the drive home, the trees passed in a blur of green and brown. My hands gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I didn't know what to do. If I told someone, they'd say to call animal control or the sheriff. But I knew what would happen then. They'd trap him, maybe send him to a zoo. Or worse. I pulled into my driveway and killed the engine. My chest felt tight, like there was a rope wrapped around my ribs. I sat there, listening to the ticking of the cooling engine, and tried to think. If I did nothing, those men would find him. They'd kill him, skin him, sell his fur. His cubs would be left alone in the woods to die. But what could I do? I was just one man living in an old wooden house on the edge of the forest. I wasn't a ranger. I wasn't a hero. But when I closed my eyes, I saw those cubs again, their little faces looking up at me. And I knew I couldn't just sit here and do nothing. I got out of the truck and carried my groceries inside. I moved like a ghost, putting the bread and milk in the fridge, setting the coffee on the counter. My mind was somewhere else entirely. I walked to the window and looked out at the trees swaying in the wind. Somewhere out there, he was hiding. Somewhere out there, those cubs were waiting for him to come back with food. I clenched my fists. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew I had to do something. Anything. Because if I didn't, no one else would. The sun went down fast that evening, leaving the forest outside my window in deep shadows. I couldn't eat dinner. I just sat by the window, staring at the darkening trees, thinking about those men in the store, thinking about the leopard, thinking about his cubs. Around 10, I saw headlights moving slowly through the trees near the back road. I stood up so fast my chair fell over. My heart started pounding. No one ever drove back there at night unless they had a reason. I turned off the kitchen light and pressed my face to the window. 2 trucks, big ones with hunting racks on top. I felt sick. I knew who it was. Those men from the store. They weren't wasting time. They were coming tonight. My hands shook as I grabbed my keys off the counter. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't let them find him. I pulled on my boots, grabbed my heavy flashlight, and ran out to the truck. The night air was freezing against my skin, but I didn't care. I started the engine, turned off my headlights, and drove down my driveway in the dark. When I reached the end of my road, I saw their taillights heading up the dirt path toward the mountains. I followed them, keeping far enough back that they wouldn't see me. My tires crunched softly over the gravel. The further we went, the rougher the road got. Branches scraped against my windows. My hands gripped the wheels so hard they hurt. Finally, they stopped. They pulled over near an old trailhead about half a mile from my house. I turned off my engine and killed the lights. Through the trees, I watched as they got out. There were 3 of them, all carrying rifles. One man pointed up the trail, and they started walking into the forest. I sat there, frozen, my breath fogging up the windshield. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. I knew that trail. It led up into the rocky cliffs where mountain goats lived. If the leopard was hiding with his cubs, he'd be up there. I couldn't just sit there. I reached into the glove box and pulled out the small air horn I kept for scaring away bears. My hands were trembling so bad I almost dropped it. I got out of the truck and stepped into the freezing dark. The trees loomed over me like tall black towers. I could hear their voices up ahead, low and laughing. I walked as quietly as I could up the trail, holding the air horn tight in my fist. My boots crunched over pine needles and frozen mud. Every step felt like it echoed through the forest. Finally, I saw their flashlights bobbing between the trees. They were only about 50 feet away. One man stopped and pointed at something. I couldn't see what it was, but I heard him say, "There, tracks. They're fresh." My chest tightened. I knew I had only one chance. I took a deep breath, lifted the air horn, and pressed down as hard as I could. The blast ripped through the silent forest like an explosion. Birds erupted from the trees in a flurry of wings. The men shouted, spinning around with their rifles raised. I pressed it again and again, each blast louder than the last. "Who the hell is that?" one man yelled. I didn't wait to find out. I turned and ran back down the trail as fast as I could. Branches whipped against my face. My lungs burned. Behind me, I heard them cursing and crashing through the underbrush. I stumbled, nearly falling, but I kept running until I reached my truck. I threw open the door and jumped in, slamming the lock down. My chest heaved with ragged breaths. I started the engine and turned on my headlights. For a second, I saw them burst out of the trees, their eyes wide with anger and confusion. I slammed the truck into reverse, spinning gravel behind me, then shifted into drive and tore off down the road. My tires skidded on the dirt, and I nearly hit a tree, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. When I finally reached my driveway, I turned off the engine and sat there, gripping the wheels so hard my knuckles burned. My whole body was shaking. My ears rang from the horn. But through all that fear, I felt something else. Relief. I had scared them off. I didn't know for how long, but tonight, at least, the leopard and his cubs were safe. I looked out at the dark trees, my chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Somewhere out there, he was watching. Maybe he understood what I'd done. Maybe he didn't. But I didn't care. Because tonight, I knew I did the right thing. The next morning, I woke up with my entire body aching. My legs felt like lead, and my chest still burned from running through the forest. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, listening to the quiet hum of the fridge and the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Outside, the world looked calm. Birds chirped in the pine trees, and thin beams of sunlight cut through the fog hanging low over the ground. Everything looked peaceful, but inside me, there was only exhaustion and worry. I made myself a cup of coffee and stood by the window, looking out at the edge of the forest where the trees turned dark and thick. Part of me wondered if he was still out there, watching me like he had before. I thought about last night, about the way those men looked at me when I blasted that air horn. I knew they'd be back eventually. Hunters never gave up that easily. But for now, it was quiet. For the next few days, I didn't see him. Each morning I woke up early, hoping to catch a glimpse of him or his cubs, but the porch remained empty. I left out scraps of meat every night, just in case, but by morning, they were still there, untouched. Every day that passed without seeing them felt heavier on my chest. On the fifth day, I sat on the porch steps with a cup of coffee, watching the sun rise over the pines. The air was crisp, and my breath turned into small clouds. I thought about my life before this. How simple it felt. Wake up, work on the fence, fix the roof, read a book before bed. I used to think that was enough. But now, everything felt different. Later that day, I drove into town to buy more supplies. On the way back, I stopped by the small ranger station near the highway. I didn't tell them exactly what happened, but I asked if snow leopards ever came this far down. The ranger, a woman with deep lines around her eyes, told me it was rare but not impossible, especially if they were injured or starving. "You be careful," she said, giving me a long look. "They're beautiful animals, but they're wild. Don't try to get close." I nodded and thanked her, but inside I felt a dull ache. It wasn't about getting close. It was about something bigger, something I couldn't explain. That night, I fell asleep on the couch again, too tired to make it to my bed. I dreamed about him. In my dream, he stood on my porch with his cubs beside him. The moonlight made his fur glow silver. He looked at me with those tired eyes, but this time, they didn't look so heavy. They looked calm, peaceful. When I woke up, the sun was already high. I stretched and walked to the door, opening it to let in the cold morning air. I looked down at the ground and froze. There, in the dirt just off the porch, were tracks. Small, perfect paw prints. 2 sets. The cubs. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't move. I crouched down and touched the prints lightly with my fingertips. The ground was still damp from the night dew, and the prints were fresh. I looked up at the tree line, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement, but the forest was silent. A slow smile spread across my face. They were alive. He was keeping them away from the house now, probably deeper into the mountains where it was safer. But he'd brought them close enough to let me know they were okay. I sat there for a long time, just staring at those tiny paw prints. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the smell of pine and wet earth. My chest felt light for the first time in days. I didn't know if I'd ever see them again. Maybe he'd keep them hidden forever now. Maybe that was for the best. But I knew one thing for sure. Yesterday, I fed a poor, starving snow leopard. Today, he showed me his family. And now, he was gone, back to the wild where he belonged. I stood up, brushing the dirt from my jeans, and looked out at the mountains in the distance. The sun was climbing higher, burning away the last of the morning fog. I took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill my lungs. For the first time in my life, I felt like I'd done something that mattered.